May you be all of who you are in the world, be all of who you are. And I feel like leadership requires that of us. It requires a deep personal awareness. It requires a capacity to pause when it feels like you should be going faster. It requires an interdependence of not seeing the kind of myth of the person doing it by themselves. And I want to support them being all of who they are.
Hi, and welcome to Feeling Beings Who Think. My name is Ariane Rice, and today I am joined by Mikaela Seligman. In her own words, Mikaela says that she is on this planet to be a guide, coach, teacher, and partner to fierce and compassionate people, groups, and organizations who have chosen to advance missions that matter. I love that. And that's what today's conversation is about, how we find the work that matters. Through her various leadership roles that have included everything from an elementary school classroom teacher and school founder to an executive director and C-suite team member, school board and national advisory group member, she has worked with adaptive leadership in theory and practice. And that is one of the ways in which we connected and that led to this conversation. In 2023, she founded Lumin Leadership, which is an integrated coaching and consulting practice that is guiding mission-driven leaders and teams in wholehearted growth and transformation. It is always a gift to listen to someone weave together the varied experiences of their life, both professional and personal, that brought them to where they are today. And I am grateful for her willingness to show up and share from the heart the journey of her vocation. If you would like to connect with Mikaela, then please check out the show notes for this episode. And of course, you can also connect with me there too. Okay, thanks for being here. And now let's get to today's conversation. Hello, Mikaela Seligman.
Hello, Ariane Rice. It is good to see you and to be here.
It is good to see you too. Thank you for making time to be in conversation with me. And I just get started in a very simple way by asking if you would share who you are and how you live your vocation in the world.
Who I am. What a big question to start with. I'll start with the basics, maybe, or the things that ground me. So I am a mother of two boys who are now a tween and a teen. But I did have a dream last night. One of them was 4 years old again. So that was really spooky. And it was like, oh, yeah, no, that again. And I am married to my now husband for 17 years. I started my career as an educator in the classroom with sixth grade kids and fifth grade kids. And I think that is in some ways deeply who I am as an educator, whether it's with, it's not as much, if at all, other than volunteer time with children, with adults, because to me, that is really like coaching, which I'll talk about, is pulling from others who they are, what they know, and what their wisdom is. I think that's true with children as well. Like, we're instructing, but it also is about seeing and knowing, and we're not pushing information in. We're collectively learning together.
In the best learning environments for children. Because exactly. Some people would say, like, what? I thought the whole point of education is to push information into their little brains.
I know.
Okay, we'll get there.
Yeah, that makes me so sad. But yes, and then we get into the fact that we still have the basic educational system we've had for way too long. But those are things that really are ground. And I have my master's, I really focused on leadership and leadership development. So I have a deep expertise with the adaptive leadership framework and adult development, really theory and practice. And that really, again, I always feel like the academic stuff, it matters in that it's applied. Like my practice, when you said how that lives in my practice, I think is, and it's why I actually felt moved here to start with my kids, because I do think there's a very deep relationship between leadership and parenting, and the ways we decide what's important, how we listen really deeply, how we let go of who we think other people are supposed to be, and not only let them be who they are, but really support them I say this thing to my kids every week. May you be all of who you are
Mm.
in the world, be all of who you are. And I feel like that is true of any work that I do with people I want it to support them being all of who they are, not who someone, including maybe some of the voices in their head, imagine them to be and don't really give them their full expression.
So what do you think drew you to want to be that for other people and with other people?
It's funny. For the longest time, I described my growing up and how that made me, I think, astute in both observing and engaging people. I described it as I always felt like kind of an insider outsider. My parents divorced when I was like 6 and my mom fled the suburbs and moved into the city. And my dad still lived in the suburbs and I'd go back and forth. People then were much less conscious, I think, of what many divorced parents do now, which is have these ways that the kids feel more integrated. We went during the week, we were one place and the weekend we were another place. But I've grown recently to think, I think for the longest time, I really just felt more like an outsider. I don't know that I wish I had more people who I felt like were like be all of who you are, but had high expectations for me, had a kind of rigor, so maybe there's some part of it that's like what I think it takes to support each other as humans. And I think it matters, especially to me, for and with people who often don't have this kind of investment. I work a lot with social sector leaders or people where there aren't a ton of resources toward whatever it is you need to learn or how you need to grow. It's do the job, get it done.
I mean, and it's the difference between the job versus the person doing the job.
Exactly.
When did you start to see that?
When you say start to see.
So I don't know that all of us early on in our lives understand that we don't exist to fulfill objectives and goals separately and independently from how we participate in the processes that fulfill those. But I don't think you see that at first. And for me, it's more about my achieving your goals, my achieving your objectives. At least that was my beginning. But then seeing, and that's how you become an adult learner who understands, there's not just one way to achieve those objectives. People have different ways and different processes and bring different gifts and skills. So I'm curious, was that something you experienced yourself and started to see the distinction, and you have the career story where you started to be like, oh, I think now I need to explore this because I'm being called into a next level?
Yeah, I think I have two parts of that. That's really such an interesting question. I think my first one, when I was in graduate school, which I went back, so I turned 30 when I was in grad school, which at the time felt like this big milestone, right? This is one of the first big zeros. And I really got that I wanted to do this work around leadership. I think it also, part of it was it helped me to make sense of my early career as a teacher and what felt like just profound failures. I was in the first year of a program called Teach for America. So we really were quite unprepared. And I think I got there and I started to understand things with looking at the whole system and seeing not just, again, something bigger for both myself and for other people. But it took me many years to have both the courage and feel the confidence that I was like, oh, I could actually make that my work, as opposed to it's something I do maybe in the work. So I had a number of jobs. When I was in my mid to late 30s, I'm trying to remember what year, I was sitting, I remember the moment, like sitting in this office. It had these kind of light, I feel like it's a very typical office color. It was this creamy yellow. And I'm sitting there just looking, and I was like, this is not where I want to be. Like, it was this, I do a good job at this job. I'm in a senior role that is impressive. Like, I'm doing little air quotes, right? That is all the things that are supposed to be part of this kind of fulfillment. And I'm not feeling fulfilled, and I'm not feeling like it's where my gifts are being fulfilled. And I took what I called a sabbatical, and what still is, and I'm a huge advocate for these. And I essentially quit, and over time, and spent 6 months traveling in Asia and doing all sorts of learning. And part of my agenda, like my personal calling there, was to see and learn from people who did deep social justice work through love.
Hmm.
not through kind of something is wrong and we have to fix it, which I think was very much where I was energetically.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think I felt early on this world doesn't work for a lot of people. That's just doesn't seem right to me. Like it, and I want to be part of, again, with maybe some hubris or just lack of contextual understanding or whatever that I had at that time, but I want to be part of that, of changing it. But I think it also led to a kind of burnout. When I was like 23, I felt I was exhausted. All I did was work because it felt so crucially important. And it didn't feel like it was based in some way, I don't know, in something deeper. It was just like constant, like a
I know I'm
churn.
picturing a hamster wheel as you
Yeah,
talk.
like it's like I just get faster and you get faster and faster. And I lived in New York City, which always felt very
Yeah.
fast. Everything was very
That's
fast.
a very, I remember.
I have to take a breath even for myself and go, oh, yeah, okay, so okay, just slow down. So when I was in grad school, I started going down this path of personal development work and doing a lot of deeper work on my own. And I had a couple mentors in graduate school that I started to see what's the fuller expression of my life? What do I want this to be? And then I think it's like iterative from there, right? There can be an insight, but it's not like all the conditions change. And so it was that sabbatical time. It was after that I started really leaning into my own practice and consulting and coaching and
Well,
facilitation.
can you share a little bit, even if it's just an experience you had working with a group that was really seeking, not from a place of this is a problem, but a challenge through love? We are going to move through this.
Yeah. Let me think about that for a minute. Yeah, I can think of a group that I worked with. I can picture them. I think there were a number of values conflicts essentially that they were facing. And again, I think this is in some ways what we face now in the world. Like, how do you get to see and understand the why people hold the opinions they do, the values they do, the ways they see it? And in organizations, sometimes those are really defined by where you sit. If you're the development person, this is how you look at what's going on. If you're the executive director, if you're someone who's focused on program. And so I feel like in organizations, it's less, I don't know that the explicit word at that point was like, we're doing this with love. But I think it starts with people being able to see one another and not just see what they're saying or see what the obstruction is that they put up in front of you. And so that group, and they happen to all have some sort of spiritual, religious shared experience, which was interesting. And I haven't always worked in that context, but I think they really got to a place where they saw by age, by background, by different, like where people were coming at it. And then they were able to come together to build something new rather than it's sort of the loudest or the most persuasive or whatever wins. And for them, that was a new way of working.
So you came back from your sabbatical and
I came back from my sabbatical and I was first overwhelmed in the grocery store. I still remember this because, oh my God, we have so many products. Like I was in India and I was in South Asia and I was in Japan, maybe more like here. There'd be two kinds of soap. And anyway, so my first experience was just being, oh my God, this is so excessive. I think coming back, I was really struck by just the excesses of this culture. And in some ways, what was really good for me was I was really at that point committed that I was going to do this work as this work being leadership work. I'm also a writer. So I was doing work as something called a diarist, which is where I worked with the foundation and kind of chronicled the stories of people they funded, and a facilitator creating experiences for groups. And I felt like I had this deeper commitment. And again, maybe my material needs didn't feel as front and center because I have an apartment. When I went on my sabbatical, I rented it to somebody and I was like, I have a place to live. I'm good. I'm going to build this. I then met a number of colleagues. We created something called the OCL group. And that was like my first run in the coaching and consulting independent world, which I've then been in and out of roles, but come back into since.
I'm relatively new to this world in the last 5 or 6 years. So you've seen it then through some phases. And I'm curious what you've seen.
Yeah. A lot more people doing it, which I think is both, you and I both know, it's both exactly what needs to happen. And there's so many reasons for it. I think I talked to so many women in particular sometimes women of color, even and more in particular, who feel like, yeah, no, that organizational thing, the way things are set up, the way it doesn't really work for me. So I think a lot more people have taken this kind of initiative to do that and figure out how to make it work. I think it also, for me personally, I lean extrovert, although I probably have, as I've matured, or introversion. I think as I became a parent, and again, there's so much coming at you, more of it in terms of how I want to spend my time and like where I get energy from. But part of my work in this has always been to figure out how to build with other people.
You were saying that a lot more people have entered the field. And I'm assuming too, it seems to me that a lot more academic work has gone into backing up the field 100%. And the value, ROI, all the reasons why it actually does make a difference or how it makes a difference.
Yeah. Actually, you just named something, which is a great example. Bob Keegan's work. I had studied with Keegan in grad school, and I was familiar with their work and integrated a lot of the kind of adult development theory in the work I was doing with OCL initially.
Say a little bit about who Bob Keegan is for people.
And Bob Keegan he's so funny. One thing I would say about Bob Keegan is he's a writer and he's a thinker, and he was at the Harvard Ed School forever. And then he and a woman named Lisa Leahy wrote a book that many people may be familiar with and have written a number of books, their first being Immunity to Change, that they did together. And at the time, his books were much more academic when I went to grad school. But to your point, people can train to be immunity to change facilitators and coaches. And like they've created something that is available to people who are practitioners doing this out in the world. So when you said that, just clicked this idea that, yeah, it's reflected back. People know there's so many more tools, options, ways to do this than there were when I went through my coaching certification. It was soon after that. And a number of people I knew who were going through different kinds of coaching certifications. Even the coaching world was just exploding and still fairly small. There were a number of institutions, but nothing like it is now.
I think one of the things we connected early on when we met was the fact that I utilized in my senior sermon at a seminary Ron Heifetz's adaptive leadership opening model.
That's right.
I discovered and became a little obsessed with his theory in my senior year at seminary, because not that it's a spiritual theory in any way. However, at the same time, the spiritual capacities that are necessary for adaptive leadership are very real. Yes. And I found the way he described even how he started his classrooms, they're not moving. And I won't get into that, but I just thought I remember you and I connecting on that because you studied with him too.
But there is that thing, right, about presence in space, like about when you said it's like opening and in a way that challenges us. Like, how do we do that with and for each other? That's one of the things about that work. It is challenging.
So let's talk about this, because I was just, before we pressed record, was telling you that it's becoming more and more clear to me, partnering with a person as a facilitator, consultant, coach, is supporting them holistically beyond the specific objectives they have for why they hired you.
Well said.
And part of that has to do with that sense of presence in a room with people, but also presence with a person.
Yeah.
And you must have learned some of that presence even in being with children. I think they are some of the greatest teachers of that kind of presence. So I would just love to hear you share about how you've seen your own development and understanding of presence in this role change and grow.
Oh, I love that question. I think about that. I both think about and reflect on that a lot, both because of my own journey and also with clients. It is funny that I will say I will never forget from my teaching from the summer where I had my training and I went into the classroom. We had this teacher trainer that we worked with. And one of the things she said to us is when you enter any classroom, there are not those 30 kids in that moment, but they're reflecting everything that happened to them that morning, everything they did last night, who and what they saw on their way to school. And she said, you have 30 little universes. You don't have just the 30 kids. You have 30 little universes.
Oh,
isn't it? I know. That has stayed with me. I still sometimes, like with adults, with anybody, we all have our own universes. There's so much in our lives, and we'll never know. Because you and I sit here now, I have all these curiosities about whatever, but I won't know those things. I know I get to engage with you in this moment, which is that precious moment. So that in terms of presence, I really, whenever I work with a group of people, I make some kind of contact with, not if I'm speaking and there's hundreds of people, but I actually do try and often look at people individually.
Oh, yes.
Really have to. And if it's a small group, it is a level of eye contact, sometimes a conversation, a connection, because it's like we're an ecosystem, right? And I think presence is based in, it's not individual. Like, I think if I am coming in and I am like, I'm here and I'm important and I'm sharing things, and I live in Washington, D.C., where there are a lot of people who are very important. And I sometimes think, again, that's like a barrier to presence, because
Yes.
it's kind of like
It's armor.
It's armor. It's exactly, this is your work. So that sense of being vulnerable to and vulnerable with in the moment, but just connecting with people. And also that sense that things like this conversation, you don't quite know where it's going to go. You have your agenda, you have your plan, and all those things, and there's things you're going to get done in a room with people, but there is an openness to something else. And I think as I have moved through my life, I have more confidence in being in a room that way. I prepare meticulously, but I also know that's not what's going to make all the difference necessarily.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I looked away and I realized you could see that, and I apologize. And that's because I'm looking at my bookshelf at Emergent Strategy by
Adrienne Maree Brown.
And the thing that stayed with me the loudest in terms of facilitating is presence over preparation.
100%. I spoke at a conference where she was doing, and I went to several, like a workshop with her, as well as reading her books. And she models that so powerfully. It's like seeing people, right? This is where I always feel like it doesn't mean you're not prepared. It means, though, that there's a lot of room that I think sometimes, and you probably see this too, I work with clients where they feel like unless, again, it's a bit of a perfectionism, but unless it's buttoned up or whatever, but sometimes it's the presence that makes the difference, not so much that you've.
Yes. And I think it's also, you're aware of the contribution of all those universes and how you need all those universes in the room to do whatever it is you came there to do. The presence is invitational because we will be co-creating. This is a co-created experience as a podcast.
Exactly.
You co-create a coaching session. I think it's maybe David White who talks about conversational leadership. Like, leadership is inherent in the ways in which you attend to a conversation.
I love that.
So much of presence is around communication.
Exactly. And presence it's funny that you just named, I'm going to say this because you just named, which I loved, something happening in the moment, which was that I did notice you look away and I could feel the break. But then you saying, that's why I did this. I actually thought something might have happened out. I don't know.
Of course.
On the door or whatever.
Right.
But it definitely changed the experience in that moment. Right. And then there's trust, there's connection. So there's, you look away, you come back, but that is really like, we're picking up on all those things all the time.
So this is where I find an awareness of spiritual capacity a key component. Because I'm not talking about religion. I'm not talking about a belief system. I'm talking about an awareness to one's spiritual, internal connectedness and supporting it so that you can hold and give and be and share and invite this type of presence. So I am curious to know from you, when I say the word spiritual or spiritual practices, what are some of yours? How is that word for you?
Oh, it's really crucial. And it was part of my sabbatical. Interestingly, more religiously, I'm Jewish and I was raised in a Jewish home, but my mother converted to Judaism. And I feel like there was a lot of like the practice, even down to making challah, which is a bread you make on the Friday night, and going to synagogue and stuff. We did less. But there was something there in my upbringing. But as an adult, I was much more drawn to a lot of traditions and to learning through ancient traditions. And I went to Japan, and I think I went to all these temples that are thousands of years old and watch people who have committed their lives to this and also just people who come. And I think a thing for me that feels universal in what is spiritual is I'll say it in a word, and it sounds, I think I've said this out loud before, but is space. One of the things about a temple, I even think of going to Quaker meetings with people is silence, is allowing for mine and other people's in a world, again, that is so noisy. And that shows up for me because, again, the silence is when I can hear myself think and other people can hear each other. And I do have a meditation practice that I've had for many years. It's taken, I think one of the things I've gotten to as I get older also is I can be disciplined, but in a way I'm holding my fists up that's a little bit white knuckling. I have 20 minutes in the morning. And if I don't do it that way, it has to look like this. So I've experimented with lots of different forms, and morning pages is something I picked up again recently, and journaling. Because I think when my mind is in a certain place, it's like, what does it need to release or to make sense of things? But I think there is a part of it that's about our own intimate, like how do we create some regular sanctuary for ourselves? And it doesn't have to be a lot or long or look a certain way. I've had conversations with a colleague about how she found it running. She said, I could never sit. It always felt like I don't sit. Like that's not where, but I found in movement. And that's a lot of my practices in recent years have been more in embodiment, in somatics, because I felt for myself, that's a place where I know, I again, feel something bigger, something greater.
Can you talk about what that is for somebody? What does that mean? Your somatic, or what does that look like?
It's funny. Sometimes I feel like it's playing tennis. I got back into playing tennis as a competitive sport in the last couple of years. And there are sometimes I'll be standing on the court. I talk to myself sometimes out loud, but there's something about a kind of like letting go, like a kind of faith in the moment of just, and again, it's not like it's the most important thing that I'm doing, but it feels like I'm grounded in my body in a way that I can recall when I'm in other situations. Like I can call it back. So I'm experimenting a lot these days with what does that somatic thing even mean? Because I think sometimes people feel like I've studied with Strozzi Institute, which is one of the coaching entities, right, that focuses on embodiment and on somatics. And I've done some other courses, but I think somatics it's like how we hold ourselves. It's noticing how my shoulders are. These physical things that reflect how we're feeling. How do we use that more? It's a kind of intelligence. I guess maybe it's developing that kind of intelligence. And I'm always in that process because I do make these connections between kind of movement and movement. Like I think to be in the world and trying to accomplish something, it's also like, I just have more to give and more to when I'm moving, like when my body, whatever that means, even if like right now I'm dealing with a knee injury, like it may not be the same. And I have to also have that kind of patience. But I do think somatics is used a lot now. And some of it is a kind of awareness. And some of it for me is how I feel things differently and then can bring that into another moment.
I know. And it's simple. I loved using the word intelligence, which I also just discovered in another book called The Language of Emotions. She's talking about the different intelligences, body intelligence, feeling intelligence, intellectual intelligence, spiritual intelligence, and the body intelligence of, I have to get up from this computer and go for a walk outside. That is so important, getting outside. And it's funny because I think so much about when I was in the church, we had a preschool. And I would have conversations with the director, and this comes back to the teaching thing that it's about, you have to get preschoolers. They have to read, they have to write, they have to do these things. And she was just like, they have to be outside. That's it. They have to be outside.
I love it. I love it. And this was, oh my God, this was my biggest dream during COVID, that maybe for schools, everything would just, freezing or not, like we'd have them in big coats and they'd just be outside all the time, because it's so important for all of us. It is so important. And again, this is where we learn our children and or other difficult people in the world can be some of our greatest teachers, right? But my oldest son, not difficult, more just challenging as a teenager, right? But he has always had an incredible physical intelligence that it's almost hard to describe. As a kid, he was that kid who would be at the top of the jungle gym or whatever, and somebody'd be like, "Oh my God, and I'm like, he's totally fine." And I knew he was fine because I'd see it wasn't just it was like, that was a place where he knew and he felt a kind of confidence, and that he was like, and there was really an intelligence that I think seeing that over the years also made it much more real to me.
Yeah. It's about being in your body, not being separate. We really are. I was separate. I mean, I'm not even fully, I would love to spend a year studying somatics and that level of embodiment, but
we're
not really, besides like sports, besides some competitive need to be in your body, there's not a lot that encourages it. And the spiritual Western stuff isn't very embodied either. You need to go to the Eastern side.
I found the same in Jew. It's interesting because in recent years, there's been Jewish yoga and Jewish meditation. And
we have that too.
So it's like the spread of it, but really the core of these traditions. This is one of the things that drew me to Asia. I spent almost 4 months of it in India, and I studied with a number of amazing yoga teachers and meditation teachers and stuff. And it was really like, a whole different way to see like what we value, right? What we practice, what we value, how we live. Yeah.
So we're in a time of some change.
You said
in this place with all this important people in the epicenter of so much of this change.
Yeah.
How are you? And your company has this beautiful name of Luminous. So maybe why don't you share about how you are navigating, what you're offering to support navigating?
Yeah. It does feel that word. There's a word that people keep using, which is unprecedented. And
it's not unprecedented, my friends.
Well, that's what's interesting, right? Is like we always all feel in our own era.
Of course.
This is unprecedented. But whatever it is, needing to be, to lead, to respond in ways that may be different than we've ever done. So there are things, I think, and I think it is drawing on, I know for me, and I believe for many others, our deepest capacities. Like this goes back to what's spiritual, what we know and can rely on. I had this yoga teacher years ago, and I always say that if I write a memoir at some point, this might be the title, which is he said, eat the banana and throw away the peel. And I changed it to eat the banana and compost the peel, because even the peel might have something, right? But I think what are the things that we do have and know, and even in the toughest of circumstances, that we can see possibility, we can see light, which is why Luminous was so important to me. I started Luminous about 1.5 years ago. But this idea that there is always light and there is always a chance that together we create more of it. So Lumin, and it was a backslash and the word us. So it's like together that's more possible. And I think this is a moment that's even more like that. That is how we support ourselves without it just becoming armoring and becoming like girding for the worst to happen, which feels pretty real right now in ways that it certainly hasn't. So it's not head in the sand or as if nothing is happening. That is really deeply troubling and concerning and requires our attention and action, but not getting sucked into a way of being or a way of working that is based in cruelty and hate and like some of the things we feel around us. I had a conversation with my mom the other day, but she'll talk about her own, if I could only get revenge, or yeah, probably you can. And it also probably won't help that much. That's what we're living in. So I just created a couple of things that I'm really excited about. One, I'm doing like a public workshop called Leading Through Chaos. And it really is about how we continue to how we strengthen our impact without burning ourselves out, because both of those are necessary. And I think sometimes in our work, there's this strain of, are you this kind of coach or that kind of coach? Are you like is this about the leadership problem or are you like about mindfulness? And I think my aspiration is like I'm this whole person who, based on this conversation we're having, has all of these contributions and skills and just like things that I hold to be priorities. And I want to bring those together. And I want other people to be able to bring those together because this moment, again, I think leadership requires that of us. It requires a deep personal awareness. It requires a capacity to pause when it feels like you should be going faster. It requires an interdependence of not seeing the kind of myth of the person doing it by themselves and bootstraps and all that kind of thing. So the second thing I'm doing is creating a group experience for women leaders, CEOs, executive directors, C-suite folks to come together regularly. I'm playing around with this now, I think maybe an hour a week over the month. And then we'll bring in some speakers for different ideas and things. We'll bring in different readings. It's like a grounding space, but it is as much about building a community of honesty, of candor, of learning, because I think so often it's lonely at the top. It can be very isolating to feel like there's only certain things you can talk to your peers about, maybe even your partner or intimate people in your life. And people that actually get it, understand, and can contribute and consult to you and hold these confidences. And also you're learning new ways of working.
I am so curious to know if you have an experience where, especially maybe hearkening a little bit earlier when you were talking about the light is always going to come through, and even bringing together this group of women in this time of challenge and chaos to support one another and trusting that the light will always come through. When was the time or a story when you definitely, without a doubt, did not think the light was going to come through, and then in some way beyond your imagining, it did?
Oh, what a great question. I feel like there are many. There's no question that sometimes it does feel dark, right? I think all of us feel that, and at different points for different reasons. I think the kind of way we work, running our own business organization, there are these times of darkness that I think for me are about doubt. They're like, it's not going to work. I'm not going to work. It's not good enough. I'm not good enough. It's not going to make enough. I'm not going to. And I often think what pulls me out is I have a conversation with you. I might have a conversation with someone else who's a confidant. I have some call and something merges. And so sometimes I feel like the darkness really is the isolation and the things that are maybe older voices in my head that start to creep back in that are more doubtful. And so sometimes the thing that I think I really notice as I've gotten older is I also can bring the light to myself. I think I often relied more. I think of the other times I've consulted where there's a little bit, it can be a roller coaster too of, oh, it's good. It's not good. Go up and down, where I think I can pause and notice, oh, I'm doing that. I'm doubtful, but that's okay. That's how it is today. That's how it is this hour. And I can refocus. It's almost like a camera lens. I can refocus on and go, oh, this is going great. And this happened. And I can see that there is light there, even when it feels dark. And so some of that is presence, but sometimes it is like the call a friend. What's that?
Yeah.
Sometimes it is like seeing ourselves reflected back in ways that maybe in that moment I can't see for myself.
I'm wondering what your wisdom from this age is to the young idealist, activist, because thankfully there are plenty of them now too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm wondering what you would say to your own self back then, or what you would offer.
I love that. I think about this a lot because I think I was much more judgmental. I think I really had a much more fixed sense of what was right and wrong, what was just and unjust, and I think I didn't ask enough questions. I think one of the things I would say it's almost like to my past self, but also to young people, is first of all, I'd say you go. I'm excited that you care enough about the world. So I think don't let go of that. Don't let anybody, like that is also your light, like that kind of commitment. And then I think it's maybe assume less and ask more questions. And this is something, don't we learn this as we get older? Be willing to not know, be willing to be, I think maybe because I started teaching too, I remember even dressing like I was older and trying to put on my authority. And in some ways, there's an authentic engagement. But again, I don't know if some of those things are just what we learn as we get older and we feel like it's okay rather than
that. Total both and.
Total both and.
Because we are creating it as we go. We're growing up. We are creating a life of adulthood that's never been lived before.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's hard for much older adults to get better at asking questions. Just the other day, I was talking with someone who said, we're all so conditioned on the ask, defend, ask, defend, ask, defend. And I was like, oh my gosh, I never heard that label. But how many times do I, especially with those who I love the most and are closest to me, the minute I'm asked a question, defend myself as opposed to seek to understand?
Yeah, it's reflexive and it's safer. Some of it is protective, I think, of ourselves, because we're even using the word defend, right? It's protective. Yeah. And like, how do we grow? How do we keep growing beyond that?
All right. One other thing as I wrap us up, which is selfish of me because it's more on my mind, but you were talking about, are you this kind of coach or that kind of coach? And one of the things that I see in this leadership development space is there is an incredible breadth of experience that is brought in because people come from so many different specialty backgrounds and then want to move towards this leadership cultivation either in their specialty area or not, because it's more about the human person and less about the human doing. I don't know. I'm like, is there a question there, Ariane?
I know. I was like, yes. I'm saying yes.
How is it that someone with your particular background, it doesn't necessarily matter the space you're going into, because what you are seeking to do when you go into that space for a transformational experience, can you just talk about that and explaining that the specificities are less important than the awareness of what you are doing within that space?
Yeah. And I think this is also a both and. I remember when I was an early coach, I had a client who was doing medical equipment or something. And I actually felt like it was a great match in all these ways. But there were things I just wasn't going to understand their financial model or whatever because of my own background. So I always want to I think that part is a certain level of humility probably, but it's almost once you let go of that, then this started for me, I think, in graduate school when I studied with Ron Heifetz, and I'd be in this room with people of incredibly different backgrounds and stages of life and status and kinds of organizations. And even though it was the Kennedy School of Government at the time, there were people from private sector. And what I started to realize, that was my growth point of, oh, we're really not, it sounds cliche, but it's not like this person isn't evil because of where they sit and what they do. This person isn't this. And I think that is part of walking into rooms of people where their work might not be my work. It might even be very different, but it is, or I don't even know if I'd say that my work really is about the people, but my background or history. But there is something about that's that whole co-creation thing. Maybe it's funny. I realize when I've worked with groups where there are people in the room who I might find difficult and all the things. And I often, if not always, walk away like in love with the people in the group. And I think some of that is maybe they get to show up, like something else is happening there. And maybe it's not always how they show up and even in that room, but it's like seeing what's essential. And in the best of circumstances, even conflictual and challenging ones, that happens. And it also, this reminds me of Adrienne Marie Brown as well. She'll talk about being a mile deep and an inch wide, as opposed to being a mile wide and an inch deep. And in some ways it does require both, because I think this on a lot of leaders that I work with, where the sense is, I was literally meeting with somebody yesterday and she kept going like this with her hands, like this sort of whack-a-mole / like, I have all these things. And part of the conversation was about the depth. Can you find the depth in the work when that's also what presents? And I think ideally that's way more satisfying as well for people in roles. Because I think often people do feel like I go to work all day and like I look up and it's 5 and I did all these things and I don't really know what they were. But how do you get to those deeper, what I call adaptive challenges, like things that you're actually working on with people at a deeper level? And it just brings so much more. You're able to bring so much more.
Thank you for going to some pretty deep levels with me in this adaptive conversation.
Oh, thank you for having me. It was a total joy.
Good. This was really fun. Thank you very much for making the time. I really appreciate it.